This is the brief European, well, I don't know how brief, European history lecture for Friday, the 8th of April, 2022. And we are quickly reviewing World War I, covering a few aftermath effects. Then you're having a pop quiz on it, and we'll see what comes after that. So, um, after the armistice, the world thinks, peace. Oh, that's good. Oh, that's so sad. First of all, out of the trenches, but first identified in Spain, is what becomes known as the Spanish flu. That's why I call the current COVID outbreak the Wuhan flu, because normally, when the United Nations World Health Organization is not working to alleviate the pride issues of the Chinese Communist Party, you name new diseases after their points of origin, or at least their points where you discover them. So, Spanish flu first identified in Spain, Wuhan flu first identified in Wuhan, China. Um, but unlike COVID, the Spanish flu, make sure you have your notes out, please. The Spanish flu is both highly communicable, you got it, and highly lethal. So you get it, and you've got a good chance you're going to die. More Americans are killed by the Spanish flu than World War I, including my great-grandmother. My grandma came home from school one day, and she had done something after school, so it was dark, and she stumbled over her mother's body in the dark before she could turn a light on. The Spanish flu was serious as a heart attack. It was much more dangerous than at least COVID has been thus far. And it is the last time we use the term pandemic. A pandemic is a universal epidemic. It's an epidemic that hits everywhere, eventually. And the Spanish flu starts out in Europe, and it eventually hits all over the world. So that's one after effect of the war. We will, when we talk about the Versailles Peace Conference, talk about several other after effects. But, to review, the war is a product of hyper-aggressive European empires, great powers, who are disturbed by the unification of Germany and what this means to the world. Just as France's incredible strength around the beginning of the 1800s disturbed the balance of Europe. In the early 1800s, during the Revolution and Napoleon, France had the largest population, it had the most dynamic economy, it had the most powerful military. And the question was, would Europe come under French hegemony? Before that, it had been Spain during the time of Philip II. Would Europe come under Spanish hegemony? The entire point of British foreign policy had been to avoid any European power from gaining Roman Empire-like hegemony, global dominance over Europe and the world. So Britain always tilts against the dominant power. Well, the fact that Germany is a colossus is exacerbated by Kaiser Wilhelm's personality. I mean, the man chooses, for pure reasons of personal ego, to get a battle fleet like Britain, because his grandma was Queen Victoria of Britain. And for Germany to have a place in the sun, a colonial empire, and according to Alfred Thayer Mahan, the writer of The Influence of Sea Power Upon History, you need a battle fleet. So he builds a battle fleet. Britain's neutrality is then turned into Britain's active hostility, because the Germans are threatening the one thing they can't compromise on, which is sea power. Had the Germans not built the high seas fleet, it's entirely possible that Britain would have stayed out of the war when it came. Had the Germans not invaded Belgium, same thing. But the Schlieffen Plan said, no, we're going to sweep through the Low Countries, hit France, we're not expecting us, take Paris and win the war. But the Schlieffen Plan dooms Germany. It incites Britain to the point that they'd already been incited by the building of the High Seas Fleet. Now the British are incited by the violation of neutral Belgium, which they have a treaty guaranteeing. And the thing about the Brits is they're legalists in certain respects. They honor their word. And so instead of letting the Germans walk through Belgium, they get in. They send their army. This creates a razor-like balance of power that is going to produce an ongoing bloodbath. Today, fewer people would have died had the Ukraine crumpled under Putin. The war is going on, casualties are going up. Personally, I'm glad, because it means that the Ukraine didn't buckle under Putin, that it is fighting for its existence, that aggression is being punished, and maybe that this will make an impression on the butchers of Beijing, the leaders of the Communist Party of China, when they are considering the workability of them invading Taiwan. I'm hoping they look very carefully at the problems Putin is facing as a result of the attack. But the downside of the Ukraine continuing to fight is that more and more people will be ground up in the meat grinder. That's unavoidable, unless the Ukraine collapses or Putin or the Russians withdraw. In World War I, it's much more acute. The survival of the nation is something that they all see as being at stake. So there is an open-ended commitment on the part of all European nations and most of the people in those nations to fight to victory regardless of the cost. But in the trenches, this razor balance is going to produce a misery that's going to shock Western civilization out of its self-assurance. I guess I could go on just trying to recap the war, but I will ask instead, do you have any questions about aspects of the war or details that I can help with? I don't normally do review before quiz, but in this case, I am.
Can you just, go through some of the significant battles and, the points in them? Because I haven't been a
Sure.
fan of that.
The opening attack through Belgium leads to the First Battle of the Marne.
Okay.
The Germans are trying to envelop Paris, but because the Schlieffen Plan was weakened so that a corps could cross Germany and help push the Russians out in the east, the Germans actually are going to pass not west of Paris like they wanted, but east of Paris. General Gallieni and the Paris taxis shift French troops into place, and the French actually win the First Battle of the Marne. The ironic thing is that the corps doesn't arrive before the Germans beat the Russians at Tannenberg. So the corps is basically useless as it's traveling from west to east. In the west, both sides dig in from the Swiss border to the sea. The next big battle is in 1916. There are a bunch of little battles ongoing. In 1916, the German High Command decides they are going to win the war by bleeding France white here at Verdun, which is a traditional French fortress. The Germans will begin an attack, but their goal isn't really to take land. Their goal is to draw the French army into a killing zone and to win the war by what's called attrition. Attrition is when you kill more soldiers. You win by killing enemy soldiers. Attrition is the stupid approach to war as far as I'm concerned, because instead of, it's checkers rather than chess. Instead of trying to win through position or strategy or political acumen, you're just killing your way and hoping that you can kill more of the enemy than they're willing to lose and that they'll surrender. You want to talk about the height of folly? This is the American strategy in Vietnam. We don't fight for position. We fight for positions that we take and then abandon. Our goal is to win by attrition, by killing enough North Vietnamese and Viet Cong troops. The problem is this is Asia. The thing about Asia, it has massive population. We are not defined by our population. Vietnam and China and other countries are. So the attitude that you can kill your way to victory against an Asiatic opponent, it's very hard to pull off. Also, Asian civilization values the individual less than Western civilization. In any case, the Germans, bereft of any other idea, draw the French in, and the Battle of Verdun is a meat grinder bloodbath. The Brits have a plan to attack along the Somme River and maybe relieve pressure on Verdun. And this is the battle where more people, significantly more people than the population of Coeur d'Alene, are killed in a single morning. The Somme is an ongoing meat grinder bloodbath. So these are the two terrible battles of 1916. The Somme for the British and Verdun for the French. In 1917, there's a new French commander, General Nivelle. And Nivelle is this charismatic guy who's going to be different than all the old stodgy Frenchmen that have run the French army before. And he has a secret, and the secret is a special form of attack. But he's not going to stay attacking. If the attack doesn't immediately succeed, he'll stop, and he won't continue feeding men into the meat grinder like bullets into a machine gun. So the French army's all excited. And the Nivelle offensive begins, and it fails. But instead of stopping the attack like he promised, he continues to feed French soldiers into the meat grinder like bullets into a machine gun, and the French army mutinies. Nivelle breaks the French army in 1917. And this is a problem because the British then have to pick up the slack. And one of the most horrible battles in the war is the Battle of Passchendaele, where the British are attacking near Ypres in the spring rains. So the mud of Passchendaele, men died by drowning in mud. Okay? Imagine mud so thick and sloshy, made worse by dead bodies and by landmines and by artillery churning up the ground, that you literally can't walk. You've got to sort of roll your way across the ground. Passchendaele is the worst of the trenches as far as the British are concerned. Also in 1917, the British try a new strategy. They undermine Messines Ridge with explosives. They have miners planting explosives. And they blow up the hill, killing lots of Germans. And the explosion is so big that even though the explosion happens here, windows break in London across the English Channel. That's how big. It's like an atom bomb style explosion. But the British don't really exploit it quickly enough, and the Germans are able to patch their lines behind this destroyed ridge, so the war goes on. The British also begin to employ tanks. And at first, tanks are very successful, but the British don't expect them to be. So they're not ready to exploit the breakthrough that the tanks achieve. And by the time the British realize, oh God, we won, let's go there with our forces and with our troops, the Germans have figured out how to patch it. So it doesn't work. And in 1918, with the communist revolution in Russia, Bolshevik Revolution of November 1917, the Germans are able to do the Michael Offensive, the St. Michael Offensive, before American troops arrive in numbers, and it almost works. The stormtroopers lead the way, but the hunger, the human condition of the German soldier. By the way, this tells you how bad the Russians have, because the Germans tend to have a higher living standard for their troops as well as for their civilians than the Germans. And the Germans are so hungry that they stop their attack to gorge themselves when they reach Allied supply depots. So think how bad the Russians have it, which is what causes not one but two revolutions. March Revolution, which brings the Russian Republic and gets rid of the Tsar. November Revolution that brings the Bolsheviks to power and gets rid of the Republic. St. Michael Offensive fails, and the Americans do arrive, and in the summer and fall of 1918, they drive towards Germany. And on the Black Day of the German army, the German High Command realizes that their army is broken, that it can't work, and as a result of this realization, the Kaiser abdicates, and on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, the guns stop with the armistice. So there's my quick and dirty sketch. This is not all on the test. Yes?
What countries are in the Triple?
Triple Alliance are Britain, France, and Russia. Later, Russia's out, the United States is in. It's Britain, France, and Russia. Bless you.
What was the triple, a French word?
Oh, gosh. Sorry, Roberta. My bad. Triple Alliance is actually Germany, Austria, and Italy.
Okay, that's what I had.
Yeah, and Germany, Austria, and Italy eventually become the Central Powers Italy's gone. It joins the Allies, but Germany and Austria are the central powers. The Triple Entente, I'm sorry. I really am. I lost myself. The Triple Entente is Britain, France, and Russia. And they become the Allies. The Alliance, the Allies. Members of the Alliance. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
What happened with Austria-Hungary and Serbia? Did Austria-Hungary ever invade Serbia?
Austria-Hungary drives into Serbia. It fails. Oh, God. It's embarrassing. Eventually, the Austrians do break in and conquer Serbia, but it takes them 3 or 4 times the length of time it should. Meanwhile, the Russians are attacking Austria in Galicia, which is the part of Poland in southwest of Poland near Krakow. So what the Germans do, and the Germans have to do the same thing in World War II with Italy, is the Germans send a field marshal, von Mackensen, famously always wears death head hussar uniform. And Mackensen and a small number of Germans reinforce the Austrians when they're attacking and when they're defending. So the Germans actually have to prop up the Austrians from 1915 because the only people that the Austrians are stronger than in the battlefield are the Italians. They are the only ones that the Austrians beat pretty much on their own. The Russians are stronger than the Austrians. The Serbians are stronger, but they have much fewer numbers. So ultimately, they're going to be destroyed. And Romania will join the Allies temporarily and then get conquered and then rise up again. Anything else? Yeah.
Why was the Schlieffen Plan weakened again?
Okay. The idea of Schlieffen was create the right wing of the German army so strong that it'll go through Belgium, Holland, and Luxembourg and arrive in the Paris area, not from the east, which everyone expects, but from the north and west, to go around it and then take Paris and win the war. But it seemed so extreme, there were very little defenses against the Russians. The idea was the Russians will take so long to organize, we can beat France and then march east. But it was so nerve-wracking that a later commander changes it and weakens the attack, making Holland no longer a necessary place to attack to strengthen the east. The weakening of that attack dooms it to failure. The fact that the attack is through neutral territory brings Britain into the war. It's the last straw. And what takes that corps, which is a group of armies, an army group, away from the Western attack, even as it's happening, is that the Russians are invading East Prussia, and there's panic in East Prussia. Oh no, the Russians are coming, we've got to do something. So armies that could have been needed, that were needed actually in the West, were taken away and sent east. Okay. Thank you very much. Yes?
Didn't Germany like ask Belgium if they could go through and they were like, no, anyway?
Yeah. That's all diplomatic nonsense. The Germans were going to go through. And the other thing I didn't mention is that the leaders at the beginning, who were provoked by Gavrilo Princip's assassination of Franz Ferdinand, they assumed that they could mobilize their forces without starting the war. They thought it was a two-step process, like cocking a revolver. You mobilize your force, the hammer's ready to shoot, but you don't fire. In reality, mobilization automatically led to firing. It was not 2 movements, it was 1. So, please take your stuff, put it on the floor. Thank you, those of you at home.